Since I'm coming back to this color study after a few days, I want to make sure that the values I'm going to be looking at are correct. So I want to make sure that areas that I'm working next to are oiled in. So this is especially being my key, my darkest dark. I want to make sure that that's reading saturated and it actually hadn't sunken in too much. But especially these other areas which maybe look like they've sunken in a little bit, I want to make sure that those are oiled in. And so I have a little bit of oil on my makeup sponge. Then I'm going to take the dry part of the makeup sponge and then wipe off any excess. I don't want a ton of excess oil on this, so I'm going to make sure that's all distributed and wiped off as much as I can. So this is fully dry, so I am pulling up a little bit. I think this is mostly from the tone underneath, and I don't think it's pulling up any actual paint. So my pre-mixes here are a combination of skin tones. So these are a lot of like burnt umbers, cad reds, and alizarin. So this kind of a combination of oranges. So I probably have used cad yellow and yellow ochre, some with cad red, some with alizarin crimson instead, and burnt umber. So I do find burnt umber mixed with white is a good neutral-ish skin tone, but then I've added chroma, increased the chroma for a few value ranges, and some darker purples and greens, slightly lower chroma for some of the shortcuts. We're going to see how useful that is. Now I could have mixed to my premixes, which I have not done. I mostly just kind of came to the canvas and started mixing up some stuff. That is because I tend to have a little bit more confidence of premixes, but who knows? Maybe I'll regret that later on. Here, this is not necessarily a string of pure neutrals. This is actually a string of grays I had mixed up from when I was painting something else yesterday, and the paint just happens to still be wet, so I'm going to be using that because why not? It's there. So it's much more neutral than I am here. So this is mostly just black and white mixed with maybe a little bit of blue, so you can see these are a little bit cooler, but they're very, very bluish compared to this, but they're actually still pretty neutral. And then I also have a couple of colors that are mixed up for some background stuff. So I'm going to be mostly trying to work in this area today. And if I have extra time to complete the other areas, so I might need to stop and make some premixes in general. So I do have a special guest on my palette only because it was wet on my palette saver. This is cobalt blue. I have not been using this so far, but if some of the background information might be easier with the cobalt blue, we will see. Okay, so we will just begin continuing to work off of the information that we had from last week, or last session, I should say. It should be a little bit more chromatic, a little bit pinkier. So I'm grabbing some of that skin tone I mixed up to try to increase the chroma a little bit. Now the problem is it's also going to darken it, so I have to make sure I don't go too far with it. I do tend to find that I'm going a little too purpley or low chroma with those pinks in the background. So that's why I'm introducing a little bit of that yellow. I'm hoping it's going to keep it in the right hue family. So that'll shift it more towards the orangey. So this area right behind the nose is actually pretty high chroma, but relatively dark. It's more of a darker halftone. I think that's a little too dark. I'm gonna go with this. I'm actually gonna take that off because I think it might be too dark and too low chroma. So rather than competing with it, I'm removing that statement. So that's hard to determine if that's correct or not, just because I'm only comparing it to that pink and I'm surrounded by the toned background. So I'm gonna try to shoot for throwing in some of the underplane of the nose. Now I'm gonna try to simplify that as much as I can to start out. It might be a little dark. I'm gonna go next door to this kind of orangey brown. And that might be a better statement. I wanna get the tip of that nose in, which is pretty rosy. I think this is the color I mixed up for that. Let's check. I like that, but I want it to be more chromatic. So maybe this was my nose. This was my nose option. So the ball of the nose is actually quite dark in value when we consider comparing it to other things. So I'm gonna try this out and see how it feels. That's not bad. Let's try sandwiching that shadow with that same value. Now that little highlight, I'm kind of ignoring that to start. I can always put that in later. So now I want to step up towards that keystone I have, so I want to make sure I'm lighter than the keystone and lighter than that, because that top plane of that nose is lighter. I'm going to grab some of this lighter value and see if that'll work. I think it might be a little too, it seems like too big of a drastic jump from here to this value down here, but that could possibly mean that I'm too dark right here. So I'm going to try to lighten that a little bit. A little bit lighter. What could also help is dropping some of the value of the next door plane. So I'm trying to make a more mid chroma orangey, or sorry, a higher chroma orangey that's going to act as the side plane right here. So I think I can actually go a little bit lighter in value. As for this grouping, I'm going to move that up a little bit too. I'm going to get a slightly smaller brush out too, especially as I'm starting to work into these smaller notes, having some smaller brushes available to me. Make sure I load them up enough. So for that nostril and those nose and features, we're going to look for those higher chroma notes. So that's, I probably could use a smaller brush too. All right, and then we've got that really dark high chroma. I think this is the color I mixed up for the nostril, the side plane of the nostril. It needs to be red. We really want to really punch that chroma in that shadow of the nostril. So I do like that more browny red for this. And that could also continue down. So now I'm closing out that space. So it gives me a better perception of that color that's against the background, which I do think it can actually be darker in value now. So I originally went lighter, but now I'm thinking that it actually doesn't read dark enough. And it's a constant back and forth. I'm never fully committed to certain things. Now I did want a higher chroma. This was, I think, a little originally too dark. Oh, let's try it. I'm not in love with this brush right now. Right, that's not bad. Now this is making me feel like my value underneath the nose needs to be a little bit darker. So I'm going to go back to that slightly darker reddish value and then come back in and modify what I originally made browner and slightly lighter in value. So here I have this kind of brightest value, what I thought was my brightest value mixed up. That's going to be for like right here. Now I have this darker value right here. I'm worried it's going to contaminate. So I'm going to use this Kemper wipeout tool to push that up a little bit so that I don't totally contaminate my brush right here. So I want that to read as my brightest note on that upper lip. And again, it feels a little too gray. I feel like I'm maybe leaning a little too gray in things, so I have to now add chroma and then re-lighten in value. So that's more, it's always to me harder to reintroduce chroma, so I try to stay too high chroma if I can, and then I'll dial it back if I need to. Now right next door to that nostril is a much higher chroma, pinky note, so I'm going to try to, I'm going to add a little bit of yellow. The yellow can add a little bit of that orangey warmth to it. All right, let's go back to that lower chroma, lighter value. And would that work for here? So that's this little brighter note there. So now I need something that'll fit between that high chroma orangey note. So something a little bit fleshier. What about this? I'm gonna mix this with this. Let's see where I end up. I think I could use a little yellow in it too. And there's a slightly purpley note right above the nostril. Let's see if I can get that in. I'm going to try to use maybe a smaller brush, or let's just try it. No, that's too purpley. I'm going to go add a little bit of pink to it. And then we can close out the deal with that really high chroma red up from the nostril. Now if I want to refine, where's my smaller brushes? I'm looking for a 2. Where are you? Where are you 2? Are you small? Oh, you're a 4. Okay, I'm going to try a 4. I'm going to take that high chroma. I want to try to restate that high chroma nostril. Okay, so I do think we can be a little bit darker. This orange note right here is, I like the chroma, but the value's too high, so I'm gonna grab a little bit of this and see if I can create a darker version of that. That might be a little too dark. Let's see. What I'm also going to do is create just this really high chroma little note right on the edge of the nose. It'll help separate that value out from the background. Not necessary, but something I like to do just for fun. It also helps to complete the rounding of the nose turning that way. So I do actually want to maybe darken and increase the chroma in between here. So we have those 2 lighter notes, and then right in between there, I'm going to take that same color that I used, maybe add a little bit of cad red to it, and just darken this a little bit too. And now I feel like we could maybe darken a little bit of this, but well, I'm going to see if I can. I'm going to take a little bit of this and separate out these 2. And then take that same value, and I think we can actually darken that, so this seems a little bit more dramatic. All right, so next door we need something that's a little bit darker and a little bit pinker, so I'm just going to take a little bit of this, which looks both darker and pinker, and see if that's going to work for this spot. So that's that front plane of the cheekbone, and I don't think it is I'm going to grab a little bit of this more yellowy, greeny orange. Try to change that. And make that a little bit more of a trapezoid. Give it a little bit more space so I can start placing stuff next door to it. So now we're meeting up with information that we had established previously. We don't necessarily assume it's true, but it is something we can make judgments against. And now we're going to be working more into that higher chroma area of the cheek where it feels really, really chromatic, but we have to make sure we stay within reason. So we could overstate things and then dial it back too. That is also an option. So I'm trying to make sure it's a consistent value through that whole section. The information on my brush was not consistent, so it was a few different values. So now I'm going to go back in and try to unify that one little spot. This is also harder to judge because I'm right next door to the tone of the canvas, so this is going to require me to just get a little bit more in. So here I need to make sure the value comes down in value because that right now is reading the similar in value, and that's not going to be in line with turning form. So I need to make sure I get something darker. So right now I'm prioritizing the value. I'm darkening that value that I put down there. But it also has to darken as it goes backwards. So I'm also going to make sure that not only are these both darker, but it gets darker as it goes backwards. Starts to go back that way. Sometimes it's easier for you to figure out what it's not. So sometimes if I'm not totally sure, I'll just start putting something down, and if then I will see, oh no, it needs to go darker and pinker. So then I'll find something that's darker and pinker and move that over here. There's a lot of stuff going on in here too, so don't be surprised if this is more challenging because there's just constant change as we move over her cheek. There's a big open space where there's a lot of changes. So what might also help is if I start to work some values out from those shadow values, which I did establish earlier. So I'm going to try to work out from some of those. And so I'm going to see, okay, so I'm about in a similar value that I was starting in. So next door has to be slightly grayer and also lighter. So I'm going to take some of this and try to maybe make it, I'm going to use this violet right here, make it slightly lighter, and it'll also make it slightly grayer. So we're going to see if we can step out from the shadow this way. So that seems way too dark. I'm going to wipe that off because I think that was way too dark. So I think I had a cooler neutral back there, but I think that cooler neutral might have been a little too light. And then it shifts a little bit higher chroma. So I'm going to take this, I want it to be lighter, but slightly higher chroma. So this cad yellow is really going to make that value come up, but now it's changing it too much, like too close to the, too yellow. So I want to, so I think I'm a little too yellow and I need I think that might be able to work actually. I take that back. All right, so that's kind of nice, but I need to take that and then lighten it. Actually, let's try some of that. I'm going to try some of that. That's some background color, but I also need to lighten the value. So instead of using my white, I'm using this lighter skin tone I had made before. And now I need to bridge this value to that shadow value. Now it's not dark enough. This might be a little too... I'm thinking about the cylinder of her cheekbone. So each facet as it rolls under has to get darker, but I'm also traveling through color space, and meaning like some of the, like the purple, I did like the purple option, but it was maybe a little too much of a different hue. So now I just added a little orange to that, which I do like a lot better. And so I actually see this now being a little bit darker and a little bit more orangey right here. So I'm seeing this little pinky thing right next door is a little bit darker. And so these values are kind of running together there. This is also making me think that perhaps my values through here are reading too light. this also might be a little too light, but I'm going to work on, I'm just going to continue my thoughts in the area I'm working in right now. So I'm thinking that this might be a good statement for here, but I do think it might need to go a little bit darker. So I'm going to take my neighbor over there and see, this needs to be lighter than this stuff. Oh, that is not lighter. That might be too dark. I actually think we can actually go like that little facet right there can go darker. So I'm going to take, let's see, is that darker? Nope. So I think this can get darker right here. Maybe not that dark. That seems a little excessive. So let's try this next door. This is the mixture that I had before. I think we can actually go darker. So this is that tendency of like, okay, so do we need to go darker next to the ear to get this to read? I think we do. So I'm just going to start inching that forward darker. Maybe some of this, let's see, what, this is a little bit redder. I might use some of that. I do think that the red is missing. The chroma is dropping too quickly. This might be a little crazy. And then that darker, maybe a little purple. So that's better. Now ideally I should probably use a slightly larger brush for that area because I'm trying to create a consistent value across a larger section. I wonder if this is a little dark, but so I'm adding a little bit of cad yellow just to bring the value up a little bit. So another thing that I could do to work up to that space is actually start in a lower section. So I'm going to take that darkest dark that we have, what we had mixed up. Now this is almost a slightly redder version, so I'm going to make sure I make it a little bit more red, more chromatically red. And I'm going to place that right under her chin. So that's kind of like a key for the area. I think I have the chroma up a little high, so I'm going to just put in a little bit of my darkest dark in there. So that's going to be that key for the area. So that could allow me to work off of that value up into the chin. So then I can see next door to that value if I like this for the shadow value right under here. You know, so then I'm looking at this relationship. So I'm going to go a little bit lighter for now. I think the contrast can be a little bit higher. Now as it goes under, it gets a little bit redder and a little bit orangier. So next door I just happen to have over here something a little bit orangier and redder. So I'm going to use that inside. But I think it really needs to push even redder. Then that's going to allow me to kind of work upwards too as well and start to connect things and start to close out some spaces. I'm pushing a little bit more purpley towards the bottom for the outside of the background. So that purple is just an alizarin crimson and ultramarine blue, so you can see I'm too dark in value. So I'm bringing some of that original color back in and making sure I'm not too out of place here. It's amazing how different in value that purple looks. Then we have that note of very high chroma red where her hair is kind of bleeding through. You can see the light bleeding through the light, or the light bleeding through the hair. Maybe it needs to be even more high chroma. So the information directly out of that bedbug line is very high chroma. So I'm taking my two highest chroma midtones. I might be able to get a little bit darker with it. But those are pretty chromatic right out of the bedbug line. The bedbug line, or the terminator, that's another term for the area where the shadow stops and the light begins. So this was a color I mixed up for the side of the mouth. You can see I think I need to get a little bit darker, so I'm going to introduce a little bit of this over here. A little bit darker, a little bit redder. So I'm going to summarize that whole section right here. I'm just going to start out by grouping it all together just to make sure I feel like I like the value of what I'm saying. There's a very small spot of that highlight on the other side of the philtrum. That's a little bit more challenging to get in there right now. I could always address that later. It's not really showing up the way I want to. I might use a smaller brush. For now, I'm going to ignore it and just try to get the lips in. So the lips we're always trying to look for that darker value on the lips on the upper plane. But not too, a lot of times we head for the alizarin because the alizarin is so dark, but sometimes it's a little bit too cool. So what I'm going to start trying to do is use, again, that single value to try to summarize. And then if I need to modify a slightly darker spot or a slightly lighter spot, then I can make that change later. But to summarize, I'm going to group it as one single value. I think it can actually be darker in general. It's too chromatic. Part of that is also a result of the fact that I'm somewhat transparent with the paint right now because that alizarin really doesn't want to go down opaquely. So I might need to come back and readdress this after it's dry. And then that lower lip is kind of a purpley red, but it's much lighter in value. Again, that little highlight on there, I'm going to ignore that for now. So we have this nice bright spot that's helping to define part of that muzzle of the mouth. I think I can go a little bit brighter. Alright, there's a little bit of a coolness to it. I'm going to try to see if my neutral can help me out. And I do think that that's not working. That's not what I wanted. I have to be careful mostly about value back here. And I need it to be much darker right under that lip. So I'm going to grab I'm going to try to darken just this spot. Alright, so we are pretty new. There's the rolling of the lip directly underneath. It rolls under, so we need to have these grayer, greener notes. then we're going to go into that larger mass of the cheek. So we're starting to fill in some information, and we're going to see where things are working or not working. So I'm just going to grab an assumption. I can kind of test it out with that. Actually might be a good match for right here. All right, so what I like about that is it's darker than the facet above it, so that kind of falls in line. It's lighter than this. It's darker than this, so that right now I think is working. So now I want to bridge the gap between the two. And that is too dark. So now I want to find something that's lighter to help bridge. Now that's not bad because I do feel like there is a slightly lower chroma note there. I just wonder if I could be just a tiny bit lighter. It's too dark, but I like the new addition of that. So I do have a lower chroma, slightly lighter value right here that's helping to turn the form. So I do feel like this little section right here is darker. So now what I need to do is decide if maybe I want to lighten some of this or keep or darken some of that. And I think I'm actually going to do a little bit of lightening, I think, in part of this section. I don't necessarily agree with what I just did. I think we need, let's get a little bit of this. I think a little bit of that can go right here. And then I do actually think that the value can come back down for this section. Yeah, I think that'll work for now. Okay, so then we have a actually purpley version of our warmth that is over here. Maybe a little bit darker. Then we have that brighter note on the chin. I see a very high chroma orange right underneath that highlight. Okay, that might be a little much. Let's dial it back a little bit. Oh, see it, my brush just picked up some of that green and contaminated it. Clean off my brush and try to restate. Clean that up a bit. And I do actually think my value needs to go darker. For this side. Cleaning off my brush, grabbing that light again. It's kind of a specular highlight. It's just a brighter note. Coming back to that darker chromatic value right there. So each one of these facets is describing a major plane change. So that's really what we're trying to do here is explore our values and our specific plane changes. Is it lighter? Is it darker? Is it more chromatic? Is it less chromatic? It's all these slight shifts as we go. And what I put down is a guess. It's not an absolute, it's just a guess. And I have to decide in relationship to everything else I have down, do I feel like this is a reasonable statement? So I'm very glad that I have these two higher chroma notes hanging out here because I have actually been using them to reintroduce chroma where I think some of my mixes became a little too low chroma at one point, and so then it allows me to redial back in some of the chroma. I do think it's harder to readdress chroma and reapply chroma. I find it's easier for me to start low chroma and then, start high chroma and then build chroma, fine-tune chroma down. That is just my personal tendency. If you find that your chroma levels are often too low, that's a way you can modify your process, is by making sure that you start higher chroma than you think, and you may find that you recalibrate down to the chroma level you need to be at. Start high, overshoot, and then dial back later on. If you tend to go a little crazy with your too late. If you tend to go a little too crazy with your chroma and you feel like everything looks a little technicolor, then what might be a good suggestion to try, too dark. A good suggestion to try, that if you feel like you tend to be a little too technicolor, is to use the string of neutrals to fine tune your chroma levels. I do find that is helpful. That's what my tendencies are. So I do find that, especially in skin tones like this, the neutrals really allow me to fine tune those skin tones. So I'm meeting up with information that I'm coming from two different directions, and they're not really agreeing. So this is where what I might do is take my value finders. Let's see if I have two that are the same value. Or what I can do is kind of isolate information this way and decide if certain relationships are holding there, but maybe are a little out of whack in another area, or if I can isolate isolate their accuracy independently. Let's see. So that value feels better. Chroma's a little high, but the value right there is feeling pretty good. maybe this is a little too dark. All right, that's starting to work for me. That crazy orange might be a little too crazy. So that's the thing that keeps jumping out at me. So I'm going to try to darken it. That works. So I'm always looking for a right where the crease of the mouth comes down and joins the chin. There tends to be a darker push up right through here. That's just an anatomical thing that I'm always looking for. That's the conceptual information that we've talked about before, where sometimes we're not just leading with our perception, but we're going to also lead with our knowledge of something. So the shadow under here, I feel like, is also redder and darker. So the bedbug line is redder and darker there. So I'm going to create a transition because I do feel like that right before the bedbug line hits, there's a slightly higher chroma value. Nice orangey chromatic value right before it hits that bedbug line. And it's not going to be the same throughout. I want to give that some variation. I do think it's a little bit, right now I have it a little too uniform all the way across. I'm getting a little too fussy right now. I need to step back and just make sure I'm getting the relationships that I want to be. I'm trying to make a darker orangey brown, because I think this one's leaning a little. Ooh, that might be a little too dark. So I'm liking this burnt umber with the cad yellow in it. I need to make up physically more of it because I'm being too transparent with the paint, and that means I just don't have enough paint out. So I pick up my palette knife and make that new color. That can be much more opaque when I have enough paint to draw from. forgot I still already had a color mixed up for a lot of this. I'm just introducing a little bit of red into that because it just seemed too chromatically green. So I'm just trying to introduce a little bit of chroma, like warm chroma, into these very, very yellowy green feeling pieces. I think this can feel a little bit lower chroma, so I'm introducing some of this darker value. I also grabbed a little of this purple. I don't know if that purple is really going to help that much, but so I'm just going to go out on a limb and try a few of these like super neutral grays and then see what it looks like next to that. So that looks really blue. I don't know if that's believable for me for that kind of high chroma that almost looks bluish in the neck there. Whoops. It does look pretty blue. I'm gonna go a little bit darker. So these are mostly just ivory black and white, and so you can see how blue they look compared to, number one, the background or the tone of the canvas, but also the oranges, all the oranges that we have in play. That to me looks incredibly blue. So here I am trying to figure out what, I'm trying to make this a higher chroma red but with the right value. So I think this is the right value, but my chroma level is too low. Kind of like that. I still think it can go darker in value. That feels like a better value. Lightening some of the bedbug line, some of the shadow values. I think it might just be creating too much contrast in certain areas. So let's try. That's not too bad for now. So I think I'm gonna go shoot for a little bit greener with that transition value. It just feels a little, it doesn't feel yellow enough. It feels too, I probably could be using a smaller brush for that. So the neck values do feel like they're pushing a little bit yellower in certain areas. So I'm going to be leading more a little bit with that yellow. that looks pretty teal. I'm going to actually head into that cobalt turquoise, you know, my favorite color. I'm going to have it get a little bit darker towards the back because it's a little bit more condensed. Actually, it's a little bit redder too. I'm going to maybe mix this in with it. Yeah. All right, now that everything's kind of, I've closed out that information, it's much more gratifying and visually easier to determine how things appear. And I get a little bit better sense of what's happening. I do also want to get that eye in there. So let's see, the best way to do that eye, I'm going to actually shoot for like a mid blue gray. Actually, maybe even a little bit darker. I probably could use a smaller brush for this. I'm just going to try to get the gray of the eye as it's turning into the I can always break this up later, but now I'm going to grab some of this lighter value skin tone, mix it into some of this neutral. Ugh. Now, obviously, for a study, I think this would be sufficient, but I'm always a stickler for details, so if I feel like I have control over the paint, I'm going to try to get a little bit of that iris in. Use the corner of my brush. I can always wait till this is dry and do all these little fancy things, but for the study I don't really need to do this. I can put that little highlight in there after it's dry. Okay, now I'm going a little overboard. Okay, let's go back down to the neck. So again, it's shooting a little bit yellower, so I have a couple yellow options down here. I think I'm too dark in value. So surprisingly, the neck is pretty bright for the most part in a lot of places. So I have to be careful that I'm not staying too dark. My instinct is to keep things darker, mostly because I think about the light logic of things, and that things towards the bottom are going to be darker, but you know, stylistically speaking, or the lighting situation in that Lefebvre has here, that might be modified a bit. I want to make a more greeny neutral for down here. So the areas I'm working out into, again, I haven't really explored what those values actually are. So I'm working a little blind. So I think what I need to do is get some of this darker value over here in so I can see a little bit more what's going on. All right, so now to get that it feels dark, but it feels light all at the same time. So I need to make sure that those relationships are, that's what I'm trying to hit right there. So I think it's low chroma, so I'm going to add a little bit extra black, and then I'm going to try to mix that with it. Now I probably could use a palette knife to do this. And I think a little bit of purple, which means I'm just going to, actually not purple, but like a little bit of alizarin is going to help darken it, but also shift that green a little bit warmer. Okay, so let's see if how I feel about that next to that key. It feels pretty nice. I like that. So I'm gonna and then as it goes up, it does get a little bit darker, so I'm going to introduce a little bit more of that, of this. I can always clean up that edge later on. I'm not trying to care too much about the drawing, but I do like a nice a nice clean drawing. So I'm cleaning off my brush, and I'm going to grab that darkest dark again, reload, make sure it's fresh, that it's not being contaminated with anything on my brush, and then I can clean that up a bit. Oh man. The mall stick moved. Reload with that background color or the hair color. And then clean it. All right. Always trying to get back, always trying to get some distance. You have a better perspective at a distance. So this is a very challenging area because I feel like I can't figure out what color it actually is. I think I'm going to focus mostly on just getting the value right. I added a little bit of yellow to it. Okay, I see what happened. Let's bring this down here. Let's have it meet together to see if we like those things next to each other, and I think it's too I can't decide. That's a tough one. I do think that I can break out. This little section needs to be a little bit darker and a little bit redder. Let's see, I'm being too fussy and too muddy there, so I want to clarify what I'm saying. So I got the smaller brush to help clarify, trying to unify it as one value. Then I think I need to that's too dark down there. I'm going to add a little bit of red to it. And then this I think got a little too dark, so I'm using that greeny neutral to bring it back just a little bit up to here. Switching to the larger brush, I want to try to close out that statement for the shadow value, because as I work the lights in there, I might as well just close this out. So I'm using some of the lighter halftone skin tones, adding it to the lightest shadow value and trying to bring it up in value so that it reads almost like it's, I'm trying to make sure that it reads as a light value now. It's a very dark light value, but and then a little bit darker, a little bit redder will get us right to here. Maybe that'll help transition that a little bit. And a little bit of context can go a long way. So do I feel like I'm high enough chroma, high enough value? So my perception of this information changes pretty drastically once I have a better context in. The pit of the neck has kind of a warmth to it, so I want to make sure that, oh, that might be a little too dark. trying to go for a chromatic orange, but not too dark. So my palette's getting a little out of control, I guess. I'm going a little too far out with that. Whoa. That happens. So I can start to feel my paint getting a little tacky, so I need to either stop and mix up additional color or clean up my palette, and then I can continue painting. Or I need to just be grabbing more paint in general, because right now I'm starting to get a little too, I can feel my paint dragging on the surface. I'm going to take my palette knife and mix up something for that bright note, but down at the bottom. I don't think I have the right value or color for that. I want it to be a little bit yellower. So I'm going to try to actually mix up some quantity for that. That's pretty nice. All right, let's try that. Seems kind of bright. Let's maybe dial that back just a little bit. I'm going to drop the chroma. Let's the adjustments to the paint that's on, there we go, that's more, a little bit more reasonable. So that being said, I'm going to go back and adjust some of this information. Not bad. Restate this because I feel like I do agree with my statement, but I feel like I have a lot of paint down there and I was trying to push things around. Clean my brush again and then reload with that slightly dimmer value. Hmm? So I think I'm trying to do too much with one brush. There's a lot going on over here, so I have to be careful that I don't overdo it. And we're always in danger of overdoing it. Make a little, let's see if we can mix up that color. That's an interesting color. Let's see, a little bit of cobalt turquoise, definitely some ultramarine blue. Let's get the value right. Let's see, way too high chroma, but I think a little bit of raw umber will help even that out. That's nice. A little bit of white, I think, just to shift the chroma a little bit lower and value a little bit lighter. That's not bad. A little bit, I think, a little bit more cobalt turquoise. A little bit more ultramarine blue. Maybe a little black. All right, I think that's a good approximation for that. Let's take that big brush. Be nice to take note of that color. And so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little bit of cleaning up. So I've got a lot of the skin tones in. I'm pretty happy with what's going on. I'm going to let this dry and then come back and readdress some colors, but I need to mix up some colors for the hair for this. And then actually, you know what, I'm going to do a little bit, I'm going to play a little bit with that color and maybe find some of those greens while I'm kind of in here and at it. So I'm just adding a little bit of cad yellow in, ooh, look at that, that's almost perfect. I think this can be a little bit darker. Okay, so what I'm going to do is clean up some of my palette and make some room to do some additional mixing. So you can see things have gotten a little kind of crazy here, but I did mostly cross mixing. I did keep pulling from my cad red light and my yellow ochre there, but you know, things happen. So I'm just going to put this off to the side. Put this guy off to the side. And you can actually see is like as I'm scooping these up, this isn't a ton of quantity. That's all spread out. If I don't have space, I could just move it to the other part of my palette. I just need room and I need brain space to think. and I do this often, if in the middle of a painting session I feel a little chaotic, my palette is usually going to reflect my mindset. So take some time to clean up, reorganize, reorient, and have some good starting points. All right, so I want to mix some values for the hair, some quick values for the hair. So they're very chromatically red, so I'm going to try to stay within the reds for the most part to start. So this is just Cad Red Light and Burnt Umber. So two chromatically red, and also the hue needs to be a little bit more orange. So I'm doing a little bit of pendulum swing because I'm doing a little bit of rushing, but I have to come back to reality in terms of value. Okay, so this is all way too light. All right, so that's going to be a good starting point for maybe some mid-tones. So that alizarin is going to help drop the value. So these will be nice for some redder midtones. Now I need to get into those darker values. So I need to put out more burnt umber. So what I could also try is a little bit of black with that Cad Red Light. Let's see what that looks like. Definitely darker in value than I had before. It's a good thing. Ooh, those are nice for some of those tones right in there. But I don't want to limit myself, so before I get started, I'm going to put my burnt umber out. Alright, so that black, I'm going to try is a little black with some alizarin and some Cad Red. Just want to see what that looks like too. Ooh, so I can get a nice, really dark. It's too chromatically red. I'm going to actually shift a little bit into those ultramarine, or the ultramarine. That's going to shift it away from that chromatic red. Maybe even a little bit further. Okay, so I'm going to try this for I just want to try this. There's some of those dark notes that are right there. I know that's an island, but I'm connecting it kind of conceptually. I know there's a lot of strands of hair, but I'm trying to see, I'm not going to be working with that dramatically different the whole time. I'm going to be maybe working into this to make some adjustments. Okay, so we have this is that next value, which I like for that. And then I'm going to mix these two together to see I like it next door to this. I'm gonna grab a little bit of this to separate this. I hope this isn't too bright in value. No, that's good. This can be a little bit darker right in here. Oops. So I just want to grab some of that purple, and I hopefully can finish out that lower left-hand section. Just trying to get, for the most part, those shifts in hue value and chroma that I'm seeing, and explore them so that when I go to do the actual painting, well, I'm not actually going to do this painting as a master copy, but if I were going to be doing this painting, I'd be able to explore those relationships of oranges and reds and yellows within this hair. So let's see if this purple is gonna now we just need to transition. So that's not bad. So I think that I'm going to be done for today, just getting this stuff in. I can let this dry, go back and modify, and then I'll spend one more session on the area above in the crown and in the sky. And while all of that is dry that I've done so far, and I'm working the crown, what I can do is make sure everything's oiled in and come back and make any adjustments to value or color or chroma that I need. But for now, I think this is a good stopping point. It was a really challenging exploration of those skin tones, but using both conceptual information and perceptual information, I'm making decisions solely based on relationships. It's not about the exactness of what's right here. So I will post one more video for the completion of this.